let's bring the other speakers on stage. You know, William, I'll just continue with you for a second. I mean, the reality is it's not super expensive to get video and text fused online, right? I mean, you know, folks don't have presences. You said that you don't have many different offices, so you can be in a garage and you can go after this as well. So how do you deal with sort of the up-and-comers, you know, the guys with nose rings and blue hair?
Yeah. Well, firstly, hopefully you go find them. We spend a lot of time going around trying to find these guys, and we'd like to house them at our place. So we're trying to source talent globally in that respect. Secondly, when the new idea emerges, what was traditional in our game was to put your head in the sand and say, it's going to go away. Don't worry about it, it's going to go away. Just keep doing what you're doing. Change with it. So embrace the change and don't feel threatened by, a lot of people in our industry think that Google's an enemy, right? We love Google, right? Google brings an enormous amount of business to our door. We love Dig, right? Dig brings an enormous amount of business to our door. So embrace the people who are helping you grow a new business is our general mantra.
Mm-hmm. Stefan, would you agree with that perspective in terms of, you know, just embracing the newcomers?
Oh yeah, I think the important thing is that you're also part of the newcomers. I mean that you launch ventures. And for example, here we have one part I didn't talk about is eLab, which is a company, and Stefan Roppel is heading it. He's here today. So we launch our own websites. And for example, one thing that we did launch just recently is a website in the news area, which is called Zoomer, which is a completely new brand. And what it actually does, for example, it makes suggestions of it looks at what's the most important news today. Then it suggests those news out to the audience. And the audience more or less chooses what's important to them. And then there will be editorial work thrown at those issues. We go after it, but in interaction with the people. So that's, for example, that's a way to be part and to embrace the newcomers.
Interesting. So that's hitting a different demographic from other parts of your business?
Yeah, it does. I mean, we just launched 8 weeks ago, but the first demographic shows that these are typically much younger users. And talking about, let's say, interchanges, I mean, we linked it up, for example, with StudiVZ, and what we find is that there's an enormous need for students to communicate also on political issues, and the people who come from StudiVZ, for example, to Zoomer are the most loyal to the site.
Got it. So in contrast, Matt, you guys don't create content, right? I mean, fundamentally your users do, but you don't have any editorial. I mean, you have a homepage with recent news, which, you know, is basically user generated. So how do you guys view content?
Content's crucial because that's what people are actually doing through Facebook. They're sharing content with each other. But as you said, we don't create the content ourselves. Yeah. We try not to take an editorial position ourselves. We do create a small number of applications. I think if you look at any platform, it's important to not just be the platform, but to also create some applications as well. If you think about something like Sony with PlayStation or Microsoft with Xbox or indeed Microsoft with Windows, you typically see platform developers making some applications for their platforms too. So we do make some applications. There too, we don't take an editorial voice. It's just another mechanism for people to create and share and comment on and editorialize themselves on content.
Okay, and you don't see that changing. I mean, for instance, you know, with all this, there was a lot of discussion about transformation in the music space yesterday. And, you know, one of the very popular Facebook apps is iLike. That's sort of bubbled up to the top, and music is going through all this transformation. You're not interested in maybe getting into that in a more proactive way?
Well, speaking to the idea of vertical apps in general, we can use music as an example, but I don't mean to speak to music specifically, but to use that as an example. I think we see a distinction between application and content, and one could create a vertical application in any given domain that still doesn't take an editorial view and still is about users ultimately taking the editorial view. I think iLike does that actually. They don't do much in the way of editorial content themselves. They really have created a great application that allows people to make their own decisions about what music they like and what affiliations they want to express, and to tell their friends about what concerts they're going to and what music they're listening to now, and to share those experiences and that content with each other. So that's very consistent with the way that we think about things.
Ramu, how do you, on a personal basis, deal with content? How do you get it in your life? Is it online? Is it?
It's online.
Yeah. And what do you do?
A lot of the personal content that I'm consuming is coming from a place like High Five, where I'm coming and seeing what my friends are doing. Beyond that, it's you know, what was I doing? Reading newspapers, or today I'll go to the NewYorkTimes.com or the Post, or you know, places like that.
So, you know, the sort of voice of the crowd issue versus an editorial push slant. How do you view that over time?
Well, in the old days, of course, I'd have pretended I knew exactly what the answer was and handed it down like tablets of stone to grateful people the next morning saying, thank you, can we have it the same next day, please? We've kind of tried to change that by one fundamental thing, which is working with the data. So this won't be news to you, but to the newspaper industry, it was amazing to find out you could tell how many people in Africa were interested in reading about Arsenal Soccer Club each day, and that therefore, if you served up more content about Arsenal, albeit at a high quality, they would come back for more each day. So we have worked very hard, and in fact, in our newsroom in downtown London, we have up on the board the scores of each story, so the journalists can see what rocks and what doesn't. And that's been incredibly useful in terms of how we commit resource and making decisions about what we should do more about and what we should do less about. Doesn't stop us, hopefully, being experts in knowing what people want to read more about and less about, but it's been an important influencer and will continue to be so.
Now, the power of these groups, like Facebook groups and High Five groups, you know, you can become a voice in of yourself. I mean, basically, you could become a rock star reporter that has a big following. Has that happened on a grand scale?
Yeah, that does happen. And that's one important piece of the trend. But I think actually we collectively tend to overemphasize the idea of user-generated content. People sometimes think only about the activities of creating content and consuming content. A few people, of course, most people consume content. That was always true. That's true today. That's probably always going to be true. Very few people actually create content. And even today, it's true that very few people create content. So do these platforms enable people to become content creators, to become citizen journalists, et cetera? Certainly, they absolutely do. I think the activity in the middle, which is really what's driving a lot of the societal change that we see through these types of platforms, is actually about something different than either creating content or consuming content, which is commenting on content, editing content, programming content, sharing and distributing content. That's a new activity. We're not yet at the point where most people are doing that in the way that most people are consuming content, but we are already at a point where a lot of people are doing that. So we see, of course, we see some people becoming journalists and, you know, rock stars in and of their own right. We see even more of people taking content, whether it's from those individual journalists or from mainstream publications or from elsewhere, and bringing their voice into how they feel about that, and, you know, making that be something that's relevant to their friends. So that can be digging, it can be rating and ranking, it can be sharing, commenting on things, programming the order in which things appear, playlists. That trend, I think, is really important in society and is a real shift. It's something that we don't always think about distinctly from the idea of creating content. I think they're actually two separate things.
So Stefan, you know, it sounds like you're doing an early step, which is you're sort of asking a demographic, you're asking a group of people to tell you what is it that they want to hear about, and then you're actually sort of putting some professionals to expose that in more detail. Taking that, it sounds like what Matt's talking about is a step further. It's sort of, you know, that the commentary becomes content in of itself.
Yep.
How do you see that playing into the publishing landscape?
But that's part. I mean, I wasn't very clear about it. That's part of the content. It's not then later starts the process where then the authoritative voice comes from a top and to radiate the audience. Yeah. So it's going to be there's more research done with it. Yeah, which should be also contemplated as an offer to the audience. But the commentaries of the people actually are the most important part of it, and to help further foster the issue. Yeah. And I think it's very. I mean, give you another example where I see, and what is also quite important in that context is that sometimes you have a need, for example, like in Germany, we have a need, for example, to fight upcoming right-wing neo-Nazism. So what we did launch just 2 weeks ago was a website which is called netagainstthenazis.de or net gegen die Nazis, gegen Nazis.de. And that's been launched by Die Zeit. I mean, that's Zeit, but it also has Geist. I mean, it's not. Die Zeit, and together with television. And what we did there is we have two parts. On the one part, we provided, and we are still continuing to provide the most important content of our own history, so that people can really get the information for free, so that they can have an overview about what's happened. And the other part is equally important. It's about what are your problems? How can you solve it? What are you doing if in your as a mayor, for example, if you have somebody in your political environment, someone who's right wing, how do you deal with it? Or if you yourself are a victim of xenophobia, stuff like that. And so connecting these things, and we have seen an enormous activity rate to help. And to fight the new tendencies there on it. I mean, within 2 days, 5 million unique users, which is quite substantial, backed by a TV campaign as well. And I think these are the things which I think, in terms of talking about content, yeah, you make an initial offer, you come up with an idea, and then you see how people are getting on with it, and then the people will start creating their own momentum, yeah. But you shouldn't continue on going on a dead-end street for too long. Yeah.
And the business model for this is what?
This is not for profit.
Okay, got
it. That's a personal initiative. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Oh, go ahead.
I want to say one thing about this. I think a couple of the ideas that big social networks can capture that haven't happened in the past. One is this whole idea of democratizing content, right? So, Matt was mentioning that a small number of people actually produce content. That's true. A larger number of people actually have an opportunity to vote on the content, to rank the content, to let it bubble up in the community. And the second distinction that these services provide is a way to actually filter the content, which is really important. So as we start getting information from all over the place, right, it's becoming increasingly difficult to figure out what is it that you really want to be seeing. And so the combination of these two things, that everyone's sort of voting on it, uploading it, voting on it, ranking it, and the second is that I can see it through a lens that's actually relevant to me, is a really important distinction. And I think that we'll start to see that increasingly. So, as an example, if we have a huge audience in Thailand, we have an opportunity to figure out, well, what's actually the most relevant stuff in Thailand that someone there might actually want to be seeing.
So, I mean, I guess one of the questions I have, William, is, when we think of services like Facebook and High Five, they've pioneered different metaphors that everyone has now understood and is taking into consideration. So when you look at these players, do you think that they have a long-term future, or are they going to be naturally part of another organization like MySpace and Bebo?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I certainly hope so. So I hope you get bigger and stronger But I suppose from us, it's working with the main players now and making sure that we're doing what we need to do to have the prominence and feel at home there. So,
but you're pretty agnostic. Like if someday someone else pops up, some other company pops up, you'll use that as well.
Without causing any offence, we would obviously also try and display our wares in that other way as well.
Very polite, very polite.
One has to be there as quick, and also we've been working a bit with a company called Twine, which is a very interesting company. There's one or two else like it at the moment, which is trying to take the community thing to the next stage. And we're trying to be there as early as possible each time. And trying to, obviously, you try and put as much attention with the ones that you think are going to be the best and the hottest. But we're quite promiscuous.
Fair enough. So I think it's time to open it up for questions from the audience. As you guys prepare your questions. Matt, I had a question for you just on a competitive landscape, right? So Facebook pops up every day from so many different vantage points. Folks are focused on what Facebook is going to do. Is Facebook going to be, a standalone company? Is it going to be acquired? All these different companies are trying to figure out how they can take away part of the success that you guys have had. How, from a cultural sort of management standpoint, how do you guys think through those issues?
Sure, that's a great question. We've never really been focused on the competitive landscape as the frame for how we make decisions or how we're prioritizing what we're going to do. We're fortunate to have a pretty strong vision of what we want to do with the product. And Mark Zuckerberg has had that since the day he started it, certainly the day that I first met him in 2004. And that's still there today. That's really what drives everything that we're doing more than the competitive landscape does. And as William said, we really are obsessively focused on the users. And with all the dynamics going on online and all these questions being asked, who's in charge on the internet? Is Google in charge on the internet? Is Microsoft in charge? Is Yahoo in charge? It's very clear that the answer to that is the users are in charge on the internet today. And we think that's a great thing. And I think if you asked each of those organizations, they'd say the same. And that's really where our focus is on the vision of the value we're trying to provide for users and on the users themselves. We kind of frame things more that way.
Yeah, I remember someone asked Eric that question last year, and that was consistent with what he said in terms of never really thinking through the competitive landscape per se, but just laser focused on the user.
I think in part that speaks to hate to use such a lofty term, but it speaks a little bit to the non-zero sum nature of what's going on online. When you have these very transparent, decentralized systems, it actually becomes in everybody's interest to be thinking about the end user, to be very open and transparent, to be competing in a way that's actually very collaborative and cooperative and open. And we think that's a great thing for the world, and really it's the internet that enables that and makes that possible.
Super. And just keep on poaching people from Google. Okay. Sorry, your question.
Yeah, I'm Heiko Hebig from Boda. My question is in the direction of data openness and data portability in social networks. And my hypothesis is that many developers actually care a lot about this, and many users actually don't give a damn. Because many users are actually just on 1 or 2 networks, and not like many of us here, maybe on like 30 or 40. And developers, they think it's important because it's easier to develop applications then. However, and every one of you guys, most of you say, we are open as long as you use our standard, and you're fighting each other like Google and Facebook, etc. There's initiatives where you're all in together, and other initiatives where you go against each other. Is it really worth the hassle, or is it really just like a show to please some developers? Just wondering.
Well, we're not doing what we're doing to be competing or fighting with anybody else. I can't speak for other organizations. I would imagine they would say the same thing. We're doing what we're doing because we think it's the best way to enable developers to build great applications for users. It is an open platform, as you said. Bebo's adopted our platform. The standard is published. Anybody can adopt it freely. And I think what matters most in these environments, to your point, around users and developers, is at the end of the day, when we think about data portability, it is the user's data. And to us, the most important thing is that as people enable their own data to be portable, that they are in control of how their information is being shared and with whom their information is being shared. That's the principle that we're most focused on as we think about data portability and data openness.
Although it also sounds that it's a generational question, right? Because fundamentally, I mean, if we ask the girls here, maybe they're too young to ask them the question, but if you just sort of skew to 18 to 24-year-olds, they don't care about their data. They don't really care about privacy. And I don't think it's necessarily that they're uneducated about it. They just have a different relationship with what it means to be online.
Yeah, I think to your last point, it's really a function of what we mean by privacy. And I think there was a definition of privacy once upon a time, and I do think at this point it's a once upon a time thing, which was basically you have this binary state where information is either hidden or it's open to the whole world. And those are your two choices. And people cared a lot about being able to make those distinctions. I think where we are now is something that's a little more nuanced and granular than that, where what privacy means to a lot of people is the ability to control with whom their information is shared, as opposed to making it totally hidden and anonymous or totally public and open. And I think that, to your point, is something that younger generations understand more intuitively. But as these services are becoming more mainstream, Facebook has a quite significant portion of its user base that's in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, all the way up to the 90s and 100 plus. The norms are adapting, and people are starting to understand these things across generations, I think.
Another question?
Hello, Guy Phillipson, the Internet Advertising Bureau in the UK. This is mainly a question for the social networking sites, and it's about yield, because you've got massive audiences and serving squillions of impressions every day, but maybe compared to the Daily Telegraph, your CPMs will be relatively lower. So is that something that you obsess about, or are there things that you can do to raise CPMs? Because I know that High Five, you said you're working through third-party networks, for example, in the countries, or is there something you can do with behavioral to raise that? Just where you are at the moment, really.
In terms of where we are at the moment, so yes, right, social networks have a lot more inventory than, for example, traditional media. I think over time, and we're kind of learning this as we've gone through our business, we're figuring out more and more ways to target users, whether that's from information such as basic profile data, or understanding kind of what they're like. We're finding better and better ways to target. So in terms of the dynamics of what that means over time, there's a number of ways that we're doing advertising today. I think we'll see that evolve as we go into the near future here. Today, though, yes, I mean the short answer is social networking sites will get a lower CPM because they have higher volumes and they're basically just more inventory on the site.
Stefan, I would imagine that the benefit of the Holtzbrinck Group's relationship with the advertiser actually enables you to probably capture a higher CPM for some of your online presences, because you can sort of bundle it in a particular fashion that might be more difficult for a pure play to do. Has that actually happened or not?
I think the advertising industry clearly distinguishes between, let's say, a quality brand like Handelsblatt and what's happening on handelsblatt.com and a social networking site. And so, but I don't have any problems with that. So that's the CPM is lower. And I wouldn't say that being part of a major group, I don't know whether News Corp is making, getting the rates of the Wall Street Journal for MySpace, for example. I would doubt that. But on the long run, I think you have to see, I think coming back to the first question and combine it with the second, I really believe that the mobility on the social networking platform is not as huge as people think and tend to believe, because it's like you join a club, and even if the club is a little bit, if Arsenal is less good than Chelsea, you're still not going to move from Chelsea next day, even if they have a little bit better players. So you have always time also to make up for it and to get the better players. So once you have done this, you have founded this kind of club alive. The second thing what then happened is that social networking at a very early stage today. But if you think about it in the future, I think it's going really to be your start page, because the first thing is what you want to know on the internet. Where am I? Where are my friends? Where are my professional, my private relations? Where is my consumptional, I don't know, where are my consumptional ideas today? Yeah, so. And that's going, and so if you think it from that point, and if you have this very strong entry and cohesiveness, I think for the future I'm absolutely relaxed about getting the revenue significantly up from where they are today, which are already, I think, for startups very satisfying.
Yeah, and the other thing is that, yeah, these social networks are resilient, right? Friendster just will not die. I understand they're huge in the Philippines and some other geographies. There's another question. Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, please, sorry. Thanks.
Mohammed, hello. Mohammed Haj Hassan, Aktabut.com, Jordan. My question is about Facebook. Facebook has been explosive in Jordan and the rest of the Middle East. And I've been on Facebook for around 2 years now, and as soon as the novelty of the applications wear off, Facebook has become an indispensable communication tools to manage my contacts, and it is, like Ramu was saying, replacing a lot of communication that happened over email. One feature that I've noticed, and a lot of other users have noticed, that you limit the number of recipients for an email, so I can only send up to 20, a message up to 20 users, and I can't email my entire mailing list. And I thought that was a very strange feature, since the contacts are my contacts. And I was wondering why you had such restrictions, and if you were planning to change it in the future.
Yeah, we'll certainly continue to evolve our messaging functionality. There are other mechanisms available to you today that you can use to message larger groups of people at the same time, like groups and pages and other mechanisms. But we'll definitely be working on those things more, for sure.
Was there a specific rationale why you would limit? Do you have concerns about spam or anything like that?
I think there were a number of rationales. There were some initial technical issues in scoping that. There were some initial ideas about making sure we had the right dynamics for privacy and really meaningful personal relationships. But we always are watching and listening to what the users are doing on the site. As this is an example of, if there are things that we need to evolve, we'll certainly evolve them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Ramu, speaking of which, what do you think happens with sort of Hotmail, Yahoo Mail, Gmail, given how much of these social networks are used as a communications platform?
Yeah, I think if you look at the general trend of personal communications just over time, so if you look back 50 years, 100 years or so, we've had increasing ways to do personal communications, right? It was just the telephone, or the letter and the telephone, and more recently we have text messaging, we have IM, we have email, now we have social networks. I think people are just communicating more, and I think what's happening is that you're using each of these means for a very specific purpose. So the fact that your friends are on your favorite social network and they're uploading photos to that favorite social network, you now have a whole new stream of information that's coming online that just wasn't there before. So it's allowing us to actually consume a lot more information in a shorter period of time. I think these can coexist. I think you do eat into things, and we've seen this in places like, for example, Mexico and other countries as well, where in younger demographics specifically, it seems like they're using their social network as a replacement for what they might have been using email for in the past. I mean, that said, they're also text messaging quite a bit. So.
And IM is pretty popular as well, right? Yeah. Sorry, question?
Hi, Marco Bertozzi from TMP Worldwide. Really a couple of quick questions connecting yesterday and today for William. I guess, first of all, just as a point of interest, I wanted to hear your views on Gordon Brown's speech that he did here yesterday. And secondly, how do you think the impact of your sort of march towards digitalisation is affecting your political coverage? Is it changing the way you're doing things in terms of political coverage in general?
Okay, well, the first one's easy to answer because I was NFI yesterday, so I wasn't here. I was actually at Chelsea Flower Show meeting the Queen, so I can tell you about that. That was a delightful experience. So I hadn't had the opportunity to, but I heard from colleagues that it was a pretty formidable.
I see you have your priorities. It's Moscow and the Chelsea Flower Show. Okay, got it.
Thanks
for making the time.
And you, Danny.
Thanks for making the time.
This is the main bit. So I'm not being cute about it. I wasn't here, but he's very impressive. There's a real disconnect at the moment between his poll ratings and how he is growing, albeit belatedly, into a pretty formidable prime minister. I mean, I suspect he spoke without any notes, something he wouldn't have thought about doing when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer. So he's getting it. It's just he faces quite a race against time, doesn't he? He has a particular, for those that don't know, an election on Thursday, which is a by-election where there's a seat up for grabs, where if it goes from the Labour Party to the Conservative Party for the first time since 1978, there's been a direct transfer from Labour to Conservative in such an election. So he's in a tough situation. As to the second thing, actually very little, and I'd say that because how has the internet and our embracing a different way of distributing our content changed our political views? The one thing we've been very, very clear about is that the same values that we created when we were born in 1855, the same things that we stand for, which is fundamentally about independence. We're not part of a huge media group. We can write and think and say what we want, should pertain still in the paper, but carry us into this new world as well. And so we ferociously defend that kind of idea. So when we launched My Telegraph, just to touch on that for a second, we've let people say within the bounds of legality whatever they want to say. Other newspaper sites have only let people debate on debates they launch. And so it's these people's site. That's a core value of ours, which is freedom of expression. So we feel very proud of the fact that the values that carried us this far as an organisation now are enabling us to do reasonably well in this online space.
Great.
My name is Ralph Simon from the Mobile Entertainment Forum. The next generation of mobile phones is going to have high-speed internet connectivity. It's going to be a function of it. You're also seeing the massive growth of mobile. What are all of you doing to actually address the mobile user on your sites? Do you have a special mobile block? And what priority are you actually putting on to reaching the mobile user through your sites?
I mean, I guess the first question before that is, how important is mobile for you right now? It doesn't necessarily have to be a priority, but it'd be interesting to see how far along it is in development on your particular sites. Ramu, you want to start?
Yeah, I could start with that. So, I mean, it's important. It's very important, and for us in particular, because we have a very international audience. Before our site was optimized for mobile, we saw our users accessing it because that's the device that they had with them. And so what we're doing is market by market, we're working with carriers to enhance the mobile experience and to also provide specific features and functionality that are unique to mobile.
So do you feel it's important to actually have a mobile block on your site? To have a piece of real estate on your site that a mobile user can go to or can get stuff from, sent to their phone?
So like mobile messaging, you mean? Or so are you saying something different than a mobilized or a mobile optimized?
I think it's more as a means of getting people to connect online. Right. So having some sort of dedicated part of your page that would migrate folks onto mobile.
Okay.
Sign up for it that way.
Oh, sign up for it directly with mobile. Yeah. You're saying? I think it's I think that's an interesting opportunity, especially in certain markets. I mean, if you just look at the big numbers, right? There's 2.5 billion mobile phones and 1.3 billion users accessing the internet from PCs. So that disparity, it creates an opportunity, absolutely. So yes, I do think so.
How about you guys, Matt?
Yeah, so to frame mobile broadly, absolutely, it's extremely important. It's also very challenging because unlike the web, where you can basically write code which is for the web, and you don't really have to think too much. You have to think a little, but you don't have to think too much about whether the user's using Windows or Mac or Linux and using Firefox or IE or Opera or what have you. You basically can write for the web. With the mobile, you have different form factors, different interfaces, different ways of inputting information, different carrier protocols, different data speeds. There's a large number of dimensions of variables that one has to account for. It's kind of like the computer industry was in the 1970s. And it's very challenging to scale development for that. So the approach we take is kind of twofold. In part, we take a platform approach, as we do to a lot of other things. We enable APIs to be available for mobile operators, handset manufacturers, and other players in the mobile ecosystem to create their own services that use Facebook information. And we also have created a number of applications ourselves. So there's an iPhone version of Facebook that's available, which is built on the WebKits platform, which is also being embraced by Nokia and others that should scale further, we hope. We have an application that's available on the BlackBerry that RIM created, which is shipping by default on some BlackBerries and is available on lots of others. Yeah. We have a variety of MMS and SMS services. We have a WAP site. We work with carriers around the world. So there's a lot of offerings there today and a lot more in the works. It has to be approached a little bit differently than web development because of the different environment.
Any of the geographies just take off for either of your sites on a mobile basis, like even beyond online?
Some of the markets, for example, in Portugal, right? We have, I would say that there's more mobile access there than some of our other markets.
Okay.
Yes.
We tend to see them being very complementary. Back to the question of having a dedicated mobile area on the site. We think about it as being more something that's sort of seamlessly woven into and integrated into the site. So for example, you can take photos on your camera phone. If you have a video phone, you can take videos on your video phone, which is an interesting trend that's hopefully going to become mass market soon. And you can very seamlessly put those up onto the site where your friends can see them on the site and people can comment on them and share them and distribute them on the site. And there's kind of interaction back and forth between mobile and the site. So what we tend to see, to answer Danny's question directly, is a very virtuous circle where the use of mobile increases the use of the site, which in turn increases use of mobile, et cetera.
Stefan, how about on your perspective?
I would agree with everything that's been said. I think maybe one issue which one should address is that mobile communication is going to be extremely important for the educational sector. I mean, a little bit apart from news. And unfortunately, we haven't made so much progress so far. So, for example, when we look at Macmillan Education, so in what happens in the K-12 area, it's not like the big vision that Bill Gates has put out some, I think, 10 years ago, that the remotest Indian village is going to have through mobile a real good educational system. And I think everyone in this audience, I mean, that's a little bit who has an interest to cooperate more. And we have this one laptop per child initiative, which is not going so well so far. But I think as an opportunity also from the reaching out to the world and bringing lots of education to the poorer countries in the world, I think that's one of the key goals that we all should have. And so new initiatives coming up, happy to discuss.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is the whole HSDPA phenomenon with the carriers, especially, at least in Europe, has been pretty amazing. So accessing the internet via your wireless provider has been extremely strong. One thing that we haven't really touched on is video. And actually, you know, we saw it last night. It is pretty amazing to see, you know, the wealth of creativity that you can find on YouTube. That's one example. How do you guys incorporate video on your site and in the way you see things?
Okay, so the UK is kind of different because the regulations here mean that the predominant providers of video you have to be neutral. You can't be opinionated, which would be kind of unusual for people here from the US, but the sort of the very opinionated Fox News TV isn't allowed here. So we're doing that. We have very opinionated news programming on our site where you can choose how you watch it and when you watch it.
And it's your reporters? Or?
It's our reporters with our partners ITN, who provide the pictures, obviously world-class TV operation. And our reporters, we've trained over the last 2 years, come into our little hub newsroom and they will say what Gordon Brown said yesterday was fantastic or what Gordon Brown said yesterday was completely hopeless and no wonder he's going to lose on Thursday. And for the UK market, it's a very unusual opinionated product and has been tremendously successful. So we do that. We also, back to mobile, we house a lot of other people, our customers' content. So if we did a competition to send us pictures of your shed in your backyard, we get literally tens of thousands of pictures coming in. People are very proud of their sheds, as I'm sure you are, Danny. And in come the pictures, and we have a competition. So we're letting them do it themselves, but also providing our own opinionated, designated product for a UK and global audience.
Great. Anyone else want to pipe in on video before we end this panel?
So we think about it along two dimensions. One is content, and the other is communication. So for the content portion of that, we don't provide applications ourselves, and again, we don't take an editorial view. Through our platform, we enable others to plug their video services into Facebook. So there's a lot of sharing of YouTube videos that happens through Facebook, for example. On the communication side, we do have an application that we make available to users, and there are other third-party applications available as well. And that's the form of video where people who know one another are communicating with one another, either fairly close to real time or not at all real time, through video mechanisms.
And so that's an app that you guys have developed?
Yeah, that's an app that we've developed for communication between friends. I think that's a trend that we're very excited about that hasn't yet totally tipped into the mass market. It's very interesting if you take out a camera cell phone and point it at somebody, everybody smiles and gets in the picture and is happy. If you take out a video camera phone and point it at somebody, the typical reaction is still kind of like, oh, don't record me. There's a very different social reaction still to video than to photo. We hope that that's simply a function of time and of a certain critical mass level being reached with that technology in the market, and that when that happens, it'll become a much more normative mainstream way that people communicate with one another as they already do with photos. That's how we think about it.
Ramu, are you seeing different things on video?
So a couple things on video. One is, I think if you look at when digital photos actually became really popular and people, cameras were kind of all over the place, it was probably around 2000 or so. And that actually changed a lot of people's behaviors online. If you look a few years later, things like social networks came up, a lot of Web 2.0 sites were sharing photos. I think the technology today with video is not as easy as it can be. And once it gets there, I think you'll see the same kind of phenomenon that happened with photos in 2000 or so. I mean, so on our site today, the way we think about video is really for sharing. So in the same way as you upload photos and the photos, a picture says 1,000 words, we think videos can say more than that. But today it's really enabling people to share what their personal videos are and to allow them to publish that into their feed.
And Stefan, in terms of how do you see video in your group? So you're heavy on the publishing side. You've stayed away from video historically.
Yeah, that's no. Actually, we have been part of a German television provider, Zeitgeist group. I think that's 10 years ago. We have been terrible at that. So then we withdrew. And I think looking at the future, I think, for example, in news reporting, I think yes, I think you can buy. I'm convinced that you always can buy a lot of syndicated stuff to go around with your reporting as well. But that's not going to differentiate you from the rest of the crew. So I think it's much more important to experiment with your own formats, yeah. And on the other side, on the more community website, to let also people plug in their videos, which are around the topics that you have chosen. And experimenting, we do this, for example, in a venture which is called Watch Berlin. And what we have done is we take some very famous journalists, reporters who comment on very personal, specific issues, and we try to make them cult. So yeah, and branch them out across Germany. I think this kind of approach is much more sensible than trying to compete like with the BBC. Yeah, from where we are, we can't. Yeah.
I guess the final question I have for all of you, because I get to ask the questions, I'm the moderator, is, obviously there are two big 10-ton gorillas who have not joined the community and social networking space, specifically Microsoft and Google. Okay, they might say they have some community elements, but please, let's be clear, they're not really in this space. So I'd like to go across the panel and hear your thoughts as to whether or not you think Microsoft and or Google are going to enter this space in a very aggressive way, i.e. build it or buy it.
Okay, very simple. Haven't got a clue, hope they do.
Okay, thank you. And Arsenal or Chelsea?
Ooh, well, that's a longer discussion, but you're not coming, so I won't be able to talk to you.
Okay, Matt.
Well, I think they do, actually. Google has Orkut, which is extremely popular in Brazil. It's a fundamental part of society in Brazil. Also extremely successful in India. They're the leader in India. And they have a number of initiatives that span across social networks, some of which we've touched on today, like Open Social. And so, I can't speak for Google. I don't know how that's going to evolve, but I think it certainly seems to be something that they believe is important and are paying attention to. Microsoft, likewise, they have Windows Live Spaces, which is principally a blogging platform, but has a lot of the elements.
Anyone ever heard of Windows Live Spaces in the audience? Honestly? Okay, there are two hands.
If you look at the aggregate numbers, there's parts of the world where it's incredibly popular.
Okay.
And it's really principally blogging, a lot of parts of Asia, some parts of Europe. Okay. It is principally a blogging platform, but they do have some aspects of social networking in there. And of course, there are other communication tools like Messenger that you touched on. So I think it certainly seems to be something that's really interesting to both of those companies. And that's validating to see two really incredible organizations that are leaders in the industry embracing this stuff to the extent that they have, I think.
Okay. Ramu?
Yeah, so I think they're participating in the whole phenomenon. It may not be, it is, I guess, in some ways with Orkut, in some ways with Windows Live Spaces, but, Google with Open Social, I think there's other services on Google, for example, like Picasa, that's very much a service that you would use when you're trying to share content with your friends. So I think they're participating. Whether they end up having to actually build their own social network, as kind of we're defining it today, is left to be seen.
Stefan?
I think they're both companies at the stock exchange, so they will look at what's best for their share price. And that has to do with growth. And as soon as social networks start to real gain growth in advertising revenues and they become the front page of individual users, I think that's quite something they might seriously look into and put a lot of resources behind it. They have the power to do so. So I would expect them to be at some stage at the table.
Great. Well, thank you very much to our panel. It was great being able to interview you guys. And first of all, a round of applause for our panelists. Thanks, guys. Great. And I guess next up is Christia interviewing Salman Rushdie.
We're going to take a quick 20-minute coffee break first. I think we all go do a cup of coffee, so we'll take a quick 20-minute break. Okay.